You are about to listen to the second episode of my new podcast, TwinFlamergy. To hear all episodes that are already out now and waiting for you to listen to it, and all future episodes that will come out, you need to, however, subscribe on the actual podcast platform that it is published on. And this is Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, or Spotify. See the links that are below this video. In one click, you will be listening to everything from now on. Welcome. TwinFlamergy, Episode 2, My Twin Flame Journey. Dear friends, this podcast is my love letter to you. And today I'm going to interview myself for this episode. Well, I'm curious how that is going to go. It already makes me laugh up front. It's going to be fun, But I have questions. I have questions to myself, and I'm sure that the stories will come out that are interesting for you to hear about my twin flame journey. So I would say, let's go. How did your twin flame journey start? Well, to me, that's always an interesting question, I have to say, because it is hard to point at a beginning for me. For others, that may be different. They may say, well, clearly 10 years ago when this and that happened, but not necessarily for me. Although maybe earlier in my life I would have said there was a beginning. The later in my life I got, and the more I came to the point of fully having finished the journey, which is where I'm now, and when I fully got into the space of having fully finished the journey, I really got a complete different view looking back upon everything. And I can clearly see that it was in everything and always was already here, etc. But yeah, let me try. Where did my twin flame journey start? Because, that will be for you the same when you finally arrive in harmonious twin flame union, the consciousness state. Everything will be clarified to you as well, and you will see that it was always present. Yeah. So I'm going to try to leave that perspective and sort of go back, like, how did it start? Well, for sure, when I was 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, around that time, I'm very sure that was the time that I got to know the word, or two words, twin flame. In Dutch, that is actually one word, tweelingziel. And I do remember that I somehow got into reading blogs that a Dutch twin flame coach person on the internet wrote. And so I was reading her blogs, and I just have this feeling that maybe she had like every month a new one, something like that, or regularly there was new things that she told us, or maybe not even that regularly new information, but I just read over and over what she said, and it just rang true to me, I guess. And I must have somehow stumbled upon that. Yeah, I don't know how did I come there, How did I find the words twin flame to refer to something that I was on my way to? Which I was for sure. I do remember when I was 21, I broke up with an important boyfriend I had back then because I had seen that I was meant for someone else. and I wanted to have a congruent experience. And I knew that now I had that fully clear, that I was meant to be with this true person, this one true love that was going to be out there for me in the future. I wanted to live that. And that was so clarified for me that I needed to break it off. And I'm sure that looked very different for him and for the other people around me. They all must have thought from the circumstances and or my behavior at that point that it was about something very different why I broke it off. But for me, that's not true. I had an inner vision of that I was destined to be with the true twin flame. And that was so real to me. And it was so clear that I couldn't live with not going for it. And I mean, that for me meant that I was already declaring my love for this one true love. And so not for my, at that time, boyfriend. So that was for me the sign, like, well, I need to go this journey to this future with this true man I'm meant to be with. And so, yeah, that does end my relationship with my boyfriend, doesn't it? I mean, doesn't it? But that was actually against the customs of the spiritual community that I was in back then. And the whole idea of the twin flame was nobody actually talked about that. Although I had found a true spiritual teacher when I was 20, or hardly 20, or almost 20. And a whole spiritual community around it. And they sort of had a sort of feel, and they had a sort of customs. And there was more the feeling that came from it to me, like, well, I had the feeling that there was something even communicated to me that sounds a bit like, oh, but why didn't you stay with this boyfriend? Because he was actually kind of kind. It was kind of a kind person, right? And that's a good way to spend like your learning years and whatnot. You don't need to do it alone. Wasn't that a very kind relationship, right? Full of friendship and whatnot. And it actually was. But that was just not how that came across to me. That was good to have a friendly person as a early 20s partner for longer when I had gotten this clear on it. Even though it still would take me around 20 years to fulfill the entire twin flame journey, which I didn't know back then. And well, looking back, I can see that when I broke that off, I knew that I was needing sort of space to process something deep about some sort of trauma, but I wouldn't have called it trauma back then. Now I know that was it. Like deeper emotions that were bugging me. And yeah, and I actually had this feeling also that would mean that I needed to be alone for that. That I was not going to be a nice partner or something while that needed to happen. And there was some sort of inkling about all of this. This all came true. But it was much more stretched out in time than I thought back then. And much more profound than I could have ever imagined. Like the healing of the trauma and also like the coming into union with that one love that I saw before me that was here for me was also much more profound. But it must have looked very differently then because I also in my behavior started to date other people that were actually like worse or something. But that belonged to the deeper soul desire that I had in my soul to start to heal my trauma, because that was actually belonging to the trauma department. Because when you're deeply traumatized in your early childhood, now you often attract like wrong, quote unquote, people, or narcissistic people. When you've been narcissistically treated as a child, then you attract narcissistic people, and that is actually like the moving through hell to reach heaven sort of thing. That was actually starting there. That was starting there. And yeah, that was part of the whole thing. So that was really when I was like a very young adult, and when I became more aware of like, oh, I have a responsibility in life to be with like the right partner or something, or like I can be an active component in making come true this one true love partner that I feel that I have, that is here for me. And I was starting to stand up to do that, to be that in my sort of way. And when I go back, I actually know that, I mean, when you're very young adult and you start to live on your own for the first time, it seems like enormous long years, but we're actually talking about 2 years earlier. Only 2 years earlier than approximately that time, I do remember having been like split from where I came from, where I grew up, to go live in this other city as a young adult, to study art history at the university there. And I do remember distinctly the feeling of having been torn away from something very deep. And I had a deep grief. And it was about a man. It was about my one true love. Having been torn away from the one big love when I went out to live on my own. And I was deeply sad about that. Oh, I could cry about it right now. I could cry about it right now. Because it was so, I don't know, heart destroying, broken-hearted feeling of not having not having gotten it or something, or having missed a mark, or having lost him. And, you know, from a perspective of 24 years later, 25 years later, that was correct. But back then, I only knew that the inner feeling was correct and true. And I was connecting it to outer people too. Also that one, to an outer person. And that was not my true twin flame, I know now. I had a tendency to project things on the outer world. And something went wrong between me and the outer world, between me and how I saw the outer world, how I connected the things that were true, 100% completely and utterly true on the inside. There was something missing in connecting that to the right things on the outside. And that is also the deep, deep trauma that I had. I was carrying inside. So that was a large wound, you know. So that's the big thing that I needed to heal on my entire twin flame journey. That's how it came out to be. But yeah, again, looking back from 25 years later, looking back when I was very young and started to live on my own and felt this deep grief about having been torn away from this one big love already somehow. And I felt so dramatic about that. It was indescribable pain. And it had something to do with being torn away from, well, didn't I just go away from this middle school? Didn't I just go away from where I grew up, from this city itself? I did. But I thought that I had just left the guy I was in love with most of my middle school time. But looking back, I was talking now looking back, right? Looking back, We now know because eventually, everything came all right, came out all right. Okay, I did heal. I did reach harmonious twin flame union, the consciousness state. All right, then everything falls into place. So looking back, I can now state that I was torn away from my true twin flame because I had been on middle school with him. He was in my class when I went to middle school for the first time, and I was hardly 12 years old. And this whole period lasted 6 years. So I was torn away from that experience. And he went to a very different city to study something very different than I did. So it was an opportunity to start over, but it was also torn away from something that I needed to get back for myself or something. And that was all tremendously true. But again, there was this deep, deep wound, gaping wound that was not understood yet. And that was like the big, big healing that I had to do on my twin flame journey, to let everything fall into place. Yeah. Wow. So when I was living there and I was torn apart from my true twin flame, and I did feel the drama of it, and I listened to songs like the most famous song of Sinead O'Connor and whatnot, Nothing Compares to You. I remember that. I think it was the time of Nothing Compares, or maybe it was already like 4 years after the time of it, when it first came out. But, and then I could cry big tears. Yeah. But I mean, I was living there in a new space, going for new experiences, and I got this new boyfriend and whatnot. You do things, you go to places, you meet people, and yeah, this guy wanted to be with me, and I was okay with that. So that's how it went, But then we had a relationship, and then I ended it because I had again, this inner movement came up again that was about, yeah, but I am meant to be with my true love. And I felt that I was doing something wrong, this is not it. So I can't live with this. It's a lie. So I ended it. And yeah, that was dramatic also in a sense. Yeah. I don't know if I would have done it differently. I guess not. But it was strange because there was also something starting up now about what I said between me and the spiritual community that I had back then, because I had started yoga classes, and that was very meditative. It was very serious in a sense. It was not gymnastics. And that was the way of doing it according to a spiritual teacher. And then I quickly met the spiritual teacher, and something in me clicked in with that. And I was like, oh, this is what I had been looking for unconsciously. So it was a yes, although, yeah, I don't know. I couldn't explain why or where did that suddenly come from, Well, it was not that I wasn't spiritually inclined in my teenage years. I actually super duper was. But I did not go to this other city to study and whatnot to like meet a teacher. I didn't know what a spiritual teacher was. Well, I got to know that pretty soon. A spiritual teacher is the most important thing on the journey, on any spiritual journey. But at the same time, this strange phenomenon also started in my life that I have been working decades to work out, to work the separation out of, so to speak, that the spiritual community there actually did not speak about twin flames, not about that terminology, but also not about the phenomenon. I mean, it is not about the word. Twin flames are never about the word. It's not a word. It's the way you are created as a soul. You know, it's an organic given fact, a fact in spiritual truth, in the order of life, the divine order of life. So the name of that doesn't matter, of course. It's just what you are. It's just what you are. But they didn't speak about that. And I think that was like maybe a reason or something that I started to maybe look up on the beginning ages of the internet information about what I experienced. And I came at this blog of this twin flame coach in the Netherlands. I think she was one of the only ones that spoke about that in my country at that time, or was so outspoken about it, you know, that she wrote these blogs every once in a while, and I surfed again to her website and read about it. And yeah, for me, that was what that was. But there was one thing that was, you know, a huge theme for me at that time, and I guess always already, and that was that I just couldn't bring myself to openly discuss this. I think I mostly held this inside because I also had been sexually and emotionally abused as a child during my entire childhood. And I mean, I can say this now looking back, of course, and having 100% healed, because the awesome thing is the twin flame journey has healed me to completion, like you won't believe, really. And it can do that for everybody, especially when you have a true twin flame teacher. But okay, that was a tangent. So what's it? Yeah, so I grew up with this sexual abuse and emotional abuse that was part of that. And I had learned through all of these things, all kinds of wrong ideas about how to deal with yourself. So I had learned that it was incredibly shameful, you know, to really be open about how to deal with these things in general. And in particular, something so vulnerable as your real, true, divine love in your heart. That was really something that was, I mean, the culture, again, that was there in my childhood, how I grew up. You were not supposed to have genuine love feelings, you understand? So that was shameful in itself. And then it was about the genuine love of the love of loves, the true twin flame made out of divine love. I mean, that was like, so I knew I could not talk about that. And I say that now with some sort of with a wink or something. I knew that I could not talk about that. But that was, of course, before I had healed that, before I had healed that whole wrong idea that I had in my mind. Even though society might also think that a little bit, you know, but I came from a place where there was like an exaggerated narcissistic society going on in the family. And yeah, that was really the result of that. And I had to heal that. I mean, it's easy to say I'm grown up now. I mean, it's easy to conclude that now I'm healed and look back or something. You could say like, yeah, or an outsider could say like, yeah, I mean, couldn't you just, you know, you were grown up. You decide that if it's shameful to have real love or not. You don't need to listen to your childhood anymore. But, you know, that's not how that works. It's really ingrained in your unconscious mind. So you're not conscious of it also, it's sort of all, that's what happens when you grow up. That's the whole point of becoming socially, programmed in the family. That's what small children do. They form their brains and their psychological patternings due to how they are treated. And yeah, these things form unconscious patterns in your mind, and the narcissistic abuse that was going on in my childhood also made that I was pretty much brainwashed in weird ideas and in the fact that you were not allowed to question those. So that was that was the hallmark of that whole point, right? Hallmark of narcissism as well. So it's actually, pretty much a miracle that I was still so much into spirituality, and I did feel the call of the true twin flame, of the divine love, truly. And I did meet my first spiritual teacher, which was a real spiritual teacher, quickly when I moved to the other side of the country. So, yeah, I mean, that's all quite wondrous, like how did that happen, all of that, when you're still at the same time so traumatized, so brainwashed. And that was all true for me at the same time, and I needed to make sense out of that, and that took me some time. And eventually that happened. So how did the twin flame journey start for me? So maybe you could say that it started when I was 12 and I got to this new school and I felt assertive about, I see myself going there before the summer, after which I started the school with like papers in my hand to hand them over. Yeah, filled in papers so that I could have my new school books when the summer would be over. And then I remember going to the school and sitting in my new class for the first time. I do have recollection about that, or that came back. It came back. I also had bad memory, like almost no memories about very many childhood and teenage years and stuff. That was also all from trauma. But since healing that again, which happened on the twin flame journey, since healing that has actually been coming back, all these memories. So I can see myself sitting there in that classroom, and I somehow feel, like with my eyes closed, I can sort of see myself sit there, and I would be like, where would I look and see him? I could like almost see him sit there, but I actually don't necessarily know where he's sitting. I don't know. Not directly next to me. Yeah. So that could be the start of my twin flame journey, perhaps, in a sense. But then I also remember going as a child to the, the small children's school, and there I always also had a feeling in my heart that there was something special with a boy for me out there. So, but very many little girls have that, of course. It's not that strange. But the twin flame call is also not strange because it is your nature. So everybody, I guess, makes a connection with that in their own way. But it might be forgotten in the hustle and bustle of society's ways, and the ways you were educated in, and the ways of your family patterning. And yeah, and then you think you just have to find a respectful partner that fits your personality and that you can build a home with enough money and start a family with. And I think many people do it like that. But I just had this feeling, like this enormous drive of making come true this call of like, there is something I feel destined to be with, someone I feel destined to be with, some place I feel destined to arrive as well. And that was clearly with the man. Yeah. But it's hard to say when did it start. because I did at this point also have clear memories of a past life that I would sort of see as the latest memories before this lifetime. That's how I would see it right now. I have more memories of more lifetimes, but this I would now see as the most recent lifetime before this one. And well, I was unconsciously aware of that at the beginning of my teenage years. And we also started to live in a home that had everything to do with that past life of me. We started to live there when I was 11, beginning of my teenage years. And yeah, I became fully conscious of this past life and knew that it was 100% true in 2019. That's when it hit me like, duh. Wake up, dude. I could have known this already so long. You're only waking up now? And then I took like some time, a couple of years, to really let that sink in and have it more clarified to me what all of that was. And so now I have a pretty good view of what actually happened in that past life. And in that life, I was a spiritual teacher that is still well known over the entire world, by the way, and whose organization still exists. I'm not kidding you. And he was 30 years younger than me. But when we met, we erected together this spiritual school. And we were the spiritual heart of it. But we were not as a couple together. He had his own family and I was sort of alone. And yeah, that part of it was not fulfilled. And I can see now that I took that on to work further on in this lifetime. And for me, that meant moving through all the trauma and unaligned things, whatever they were, in my soul until I could also make come true that part of our being together. The romantic part, the lovers part, the life partners part. Besides the spiritual teacher and student and the spiritual mission partners. Which we're also now. And then now, yeah, we're working that out. The romance, the partnership, as we speak. And that was this whole gap of working it out. What I needed to work out. All the trauma I needed to work through in this lifetime. Which was for me personally very much about, well, you know, in that past lifetime that I'm now referring to, it's like 1.5 centuries ago, I was sort of a feminist avant la lettre, traveling the world alone and meeting people from all walks of life and all colors and working spiritually with them as well. And I behaved more like a man in a sense, like an intellectual, like a cigar smoking intellectual kind of person. That was an author as well. And that's very cool and stuff, and it is some sort of a feminist avant la lettre. But that was not what it was about. It was not it was not a, how do you say that? It was no activism, it was not political activism in itself. It was just following this drive for freedom and divine wisdom. And seeing that it was possible, and that's it. But in a way, it did give me, well, not yet the possibility to fully work out the emotional, the romantic, the relational atmosphere, with myself in the first place. And that's what I'm like learning now. That's what my soul is learning now. That's actually more the softness of my female development, if I could say it like that, being the divine feminine in my union. Yeah, which may then seem to be anti-feminist in a sense. Maybe depends on what you mean with the word feminism, I think it could mean whatever feels good to you as a woman. And having the freedom to make that come true. That sounds good to me. But I mean, I know what it means, like politically, historically, art historically even, because I studied that in this lifetime now as part of my master's thesis. So I did approximately 3 years in gender studies, feminist history, feminist art history at the university where I was studying as an extra to give shape to my master thesis that made me a Master of Arts in 2006. So yeah, I became scientifically updated on what happened with the feminism. But my conclusion also of my master thesis in 2006 reads literally, well, yeah, it reads literally, but I'm just going to paraphrase it anyway because I don't have it here before me now. It does read something like, so, and therefore now is my final conclusion that we're really ready to go deeper in the inner atmosphere. And when women are the bridge to start to do that for everyone, then that is fantastic. So that was my conclusion in 2006 already, that we need to go deeper in the deeper atmosphere of life, in the spiritual atmosphere of life. And right there, when we would have seen that we have lived as a smoking, traveling man instead of being the divine feminine that I truly am supposed to be in my twin flame union when we are also romantic partners, then it is actually maybe feminist to start to go deeper in that truth, to go deeper in the spiritual truth, and to go after that, to go repair that, to go after that experience that you haven't learned yet in spiritual truth in yourself. And that makes you whole. And that is the freedom that you have to embrace your full divine feminine power. And that is what you're supposed to do. And that's the healing that your union also asks. And that's what we're doing now, and etc., etc. And that's why we can be together now. And earlier we couldn't yet. And that's why I grew up how I grew up. That's why my soul, you could perhaps say, chose that experience in that family that went in that way, because it would give me the incentive to move through these lessons that my soul had wanted to learn, and that makes it now possible to be together with my true twin flame, even though we met already, 30 years ago at this point, 32. Yeah. So that was a lot about how did my twin flame journey start. Yeah. And I remember that I said a lot about that there was some sort of this dichotomy between me and the spiritual teacher and community that I had also around 2006, let's say, because they didn't speak about it and I was reading in secret about it, right? But that situation kept on going approximately like that until much later, when I went through my utmost twin flame healing. And I went to the state of consciousness of harmonious twin flame union. Yeah. And that's where everything came together and became one. And all these seeming separations and dichotomies, and they just were like, it was as if the glue came to glue everything together as well. Yeah. Okay, let's try to go to another question. What are some of the remarkable things you experienced? Oh, wow. Well, I think I talked about a whole bunch of them already, didn't I? But there were remarkable things, of course. Yeah. I mean, I did make a video on my YouTube channel, Petra at Creative Universe. I do remember I made once a video, it's now approximately a year ago, that was about all the woo-woo things on the journey. And there I spoke about 3 very woo-woo things that happen. Because I think that seems for many people like the most outrageous, but also the most characterizing, maybe, if you don't know much about it, things about the twin flame journey that, like weird things happen. and I can't deny that they sort of do. That's true. Well, right now I would say that it's wisdom to not get hung up in them, to not get stuck there, because it's not about the phenomenon. It is about going deeper and moving towards the true love that is inside of you and making that real. That's what it really is about. But it's true that remarkable woo-woo things happened to me too. And one of the things that comes to mind right now is how so after I had studied, and he too, we did reconnect because we went back to the city where we grew up in around the same time. But I did not necessarily know that at that time. I just knew that I felt an urge to go back to the city. And there was no reason for it other than it was just some sort of this big overflowing love in my heart wanted to be there. And there was no concrete evidence that my twin flame was there. There was no job I had there, or financial reason or career move. That was all not like that. It was more like an anti-career move, if it was anything. But there was a really woo-woo moment about it too. I do remember that I was already sort of preparing for some time to move back here and whatnot, because I felt that in the depth of my heart that was what was being asked from me. And yes, I felt that in the terms of on my twin flame journey, but I still could not really talk about that. Although I wrote poetry about that, absolutely I did, and I was actually quite famous at that moment for my poetry nationwide. I'm not joking. I was a performing poet and a published poet and whatnot. So, but yeah, this moment came when I was in my home. I had sort of an apartment on my own in the city I had been studying, and I just sort of woke up one day, and it was as if the bell rang, but like with such a vengeance that you're just shook in your entire being. And it was as if I had an inner visual of that the light went out in the city where I was living. The light went out in the apartment where I was living, sort of like that. Like the sun went out, some sort of, that was the feeling of it. Let's say it's full daylight, but the sun stops shining like an eclipse. And there was a place where the light went on, and that was where I had been growing up. Yeah. So that was like, it felt as though it was like, oh, that decision was made for me at that moment. Okay, light is out here. You need to go back now. And I did. That was it. For that whole life that I had there for 10 years. And I went back with no distinct plan, just because my twin flame journey brought me back there, because my twin flame was there. That's sort of how it felt to me. And I guess it was true. It was just true. So that was it. I was still suffering from the projected on other guys phenomenon, but it was true. And it was a year later that my true twin flame did connect with me via LinkedIn and invited me for a drink. And we did that. And that's where a new time started, a new time frame in my twin flame journey. And we kept on reconnecting now and then, maybe some years in between, in some cases. But it was not real sure what exactly that was. Were we friends or something? I felt as though he was my very, very best friend. I was deeply touched by that. And I would think about him unconsciously on very, very many occasions. But I still hadn't fully figured it out yet. Very interesting, right? Very interesting. And then there was another remarkable event. Maybe it's interesting to talk about that one too. There was a moment in that time frame of my life, that chapter of my life, that was maybe like 6 years in, 7 years in. And I was in the house that was connected with my past life experience, because I was house sitting in my parents' house. Although I had my own apartment in the city I grew up. But in the summer, for some weeks, I was there. And I was waking up in the morning, sort of half awake, felt sort of half asleep again, feeling as though I was leaving my body, and I flew to a place in, well, God knows where, the astral world, I don't know, somewhere, to meet him. And we had an appointment there, and we were talking about how to tie this together, how to make this work. And I guess we made our plans. And I flew back as a sort of a ghost or something outside of my body. And then I woke up again in my bed with this feeling and memory like, well, it's just as if I just came back from flying around outside my body and having met him. Still not having fully connected the right identity to my longing and my calling it twin flame. Yeah. So that was such a woo-woo experience as well. And that's when it really starts to become more like a regular thing, that I was really making steps to really make it come true now. And that was also when I went to the episode of making steps to creating the spiritual school that I lead now in this lifetime. And I started to go to the episode in my life in which I was meeting the Christ Masters. And we had an exchange of initiations. And I'm not going to say much about that in this interview, but there could be said an enormous many things about that. This just may be very wondrous that I say this suddenly here, because I had this meeting in the flesh with real people. This was not an out-of-body spiritual experience. It was an in-the-body experience to meet the Christed Masters and have my spiritual role in that. And it's actually also, we're talking about the second coming. We're talking about the Christ Masters on earth right now. And we're talking about in the flesh again. So this asks for a lot of explanation. But I guess that we're going to have future episodes that I could potentially talk about this one, right? So that was one of my personal, individual desires in my heart, to first do that before making come true the full union with my true twin flame, and start to live that in the incarnated life, so to speak. That was my heart's desire, to do that. Not everybody needs to do that episode with meeting the Christ Masters, although it is central to my possibility to pass it on now to you. It is not that you need to do that. That was something that was in my heart, that I wanted to do, that I desired to do. I had been preparing for lifetimes to do that one. So it was an incredibly important episode, and it encompassed a whole lot. And a couple of years, but it was one of the steps that came after, and there came more steps in which I could finally make come true my full twin flame union, and have revealed who it all the time already was, and let go of my false twin flame and move to the consciousness state of harmonious twin flame union, and start to build there as well on my psychological health, my physical health, my school, all of it, my relationship with my true twin flame, of course, as well. Yeah, so these were some remarkable things I experienced. Yeah, absolutely. And, people talk about the twin flame signs as in people have experiences often that look like finding feathers on the road. Well, I did that. I had that for, 13 years approximately, or over, all the time. But I also started to find keys. And eventually, I also came to the key holder initiations, and I started to call my most central twin flame healing tool key as well. And people often talk about, I see numbers, and I saw them as well. Yeah, I had that for around 15 years or something that I can remember too. Yeah, 1111, 2222, 4444, 5555. I guess those were the most frequent for me. 33. Yeah, or like less times of the same number at the same time. Yeah, but that was for me, I guess, a language between me and the divine as well. And I loved looking at nature signs besides the one that we already discussed, such as birds and whatnot, that I would see on my walks, because I loved doing nature walks to calm myself down and spiritually process things. That's what I loved on my journey that more and more became my inner journey, which is how it's supposed to be lived. It's how it's supposed to be traveled. But you do something on the outer at the same time. And a lot of the times I made walks. That was a large chapter in my life, that I made a lot of nature walks. Not far away or something, but just enjoying whatever was now in the full sun or rain, or yeah, preferably around the corner, actually. Yeah. So let's go to another question. How did you come to know more about what this is? Okay, interesting. Well, let me take a sip of my drink to get some more Flamergy to answer this question. Because we're still in the TwinFlamergy episode podcast. That's what it's called. The podcast, of course. How did I come to know more about what this is? So in a sense, I think I had sort of my own, well, terminology is too much to say, but feelings or wordings for it, until I found the idea of tweelingziel, which translates to twin soul, literally, but it's generally accepted to be called twin flame in the English language, an international culture between quotes about it. And that was around when I was, what I said, 21 to 24, 25, that I started to read with this word. So I must have heard about that somehow in all kinds of esoteric things that I was interested in already. And then it sort of came to me, I guess. And I looked it up on the internet and I found someone that wrote about it. And that's where it started. And that was before there was like a tsunami of things on the internet, blogs, websites, coaches, and later on YouTube coaches, Twin Flames on YouTube. That was all, well, that started like 12 years, 15 years after that, you know. That's when the big wave came, if we can call it that, of that really took off on the internet and on YouTube and whatnot. And a whole bunch of that later on in these later years. I have watched a whole bunch of that and stuff when I was still in my searching for answers period. That is clearly closed off now for quite some time already. So how did I come to know more about what this is? Well, I think my first spiritual teacher, as I said, I was actually confused about that they did never talk about it. But I mean, the atmosphere was about something real, you know, the atmosphere was about making the soul real. And that was a tangible, true atmosphere. And that did help me to give the twin flame a place in spiritual reality, with the emphasis on reality. I guess, yeah, in a sense. Still a bit at the back of my head, you know, when I think about 2015, 10 years back. But I think it did help me because at least I knew what real spiritual work was. So that was coming more to know about, not about twin flames, but about what true spiritual work was. And what the true spiritual, the traditional, actually also, the traditional spiritual journey is what that is. And I mean, that is important for twin flames. I mean, twin flames is actually, how I would look at it today is, twin flames is the upgrade of the spiritual traditional journey. Twin flames is the leading edge of the traditional spiritual journey. It is the upgrade to the newest software of the traditional spiritual journey. And I have been able to make that come true on top of the traditional spiritual journey and the wisdom about that, which sort of gives me one step further in what spirituality in the lives of people is able to do than where my first spiritual teacher was and brings people, which is an interesting concept to think about, that I was able to realize that. I mean, that was not even conceivable when I was close to him and whatnot, that I would really do that, because I was at that time still so deeply traumatized and whatnot. Anyway, all these talks about trauma. I mean, I don't want to talk about depressing things at all, but I mean, you need to have some elements that are concrete to talk about what truly happened, and that is just an ingredient. I can't help it. So that's how I come up with the trauma. I don't feel distraught about it today. That's not what it is, because it actually is in the past now. So how did I come more to know about what it is? So I did try at the beginning of more things came on YouTube about it from, let's say, 2010, 11, 12, 13, 14 on. From that time on, I did some years watch YouTube videos and clearly trying to somehow distill information from it, which did not necessarily succeed for me. And I did not really find in the twin flame spirituality a teacher that did it for me. Because I know I did sort of try that on, I did go actually to that one blog writer from around 2004-5 once in 2013, and that was actually some sort of a reading that she gave me from inner seeing, and that was pretty much correct. But she became a person that stopped pursuing the twin flame in a sense, because she actually didn't know how to make it really come true, and that's a whole problem. I see that I have a complete overview now of where all the information is and what people do with it and what they don't do with it, and that's a big problem. Maybe we talk about it in future episodes, about what people do that are so-called twin flame coaches or whatnot. And sometimes, just like that person did for me in 2013, she gave me a reading that eventually came out as correct, which is awesome, or almost sort of correct. And yeah, but she couldn't bring me there, you see. She wasn't a spiritual teacher in that sense. And she even stepped away from trying to bring people there, because she stepped away from trying to bring herself there, so she couldn't bring herself there. And so there's just that's an enormous lack, you need a real spiritual teacher for that, to be able to do that. And it's very fortunate, very special in the sense that there are people that can say something about it that eventually still sort of holds true, but they cannot, when they cannot bring you there, that's not really the solution that people need, that they're looking for. Well, luckily, I'm here now, to do both, being able to do both, give you readings that are correct, because they directly come from Divine Mother, about your twin flame situation, and being able to bring you there in reality, because I first did it myself. And I brought 3 persons in it until today, that we're speaking now, June 2024. So, yeah, it can become a lot more in the future, of course. So how did I eventually learn the truth about things, and how did I get the tool that I pass on for Twin Flames now, etc. Well, these were all conversations between me and Divine Mother, specifically since 2011, that I kept within me for a long time before I took it more seriously and did it more myself and made it come true, and had the guts to start to bring it out more and guide others with it more, and got proof that it worked on other people too. And that flow was eventually sort of met by meeting the Christed Masters. And that's where I got also a full acknowledgement with it. And that is where actually the true twin flame information was, so to speak. And yeah, that made all the twin flame talkers on YouTube and all and stuff actually sort of fall away. Yeah, most of them anyways. Because some things sort of true are sort of true, and some things can be sort of helpful. But since I got the real full deal, that doesn't really mean anything anymore. You understand? So eventually I say that what it was direct experience with Divine Mother, direct experience with the Christed Masters, and these two crossed each other or met each other in the most literal way, but also figuratively, etc., and in methodology and whatnot. And yeah, I think that is eventually the most important thing that happened. And I combine that with everything that I have gone through myself, because then I know 100% this is really what truly happens. Of course, looked at with a lens that says that not only I experienced it, but that it is also a general pattern in how it works with twin flames, right? So it's a combination of channeling God, my own experiences, the acknowledgement in the meeting of the Christed Masters. And that was eventually like a self-created knowing what it all is. And no necessity anymore to like read other people's blogs about it or what. So question 4. Where do you feel this is heading? Well, this is just heading to being real happy. Finally real happy, having been freed on the inner plane from all bonds that are not necessary anymore, that are not making me happy. And where that is heading is to a genuine contribution to the world, to diminish the wars that people are living in, whether they are about countries or about food or about their own internal emotional state. And that is like one big shiny future, together with my true twin flame, without whom I cannot do anything that I do today. We already do it together, I have him as an inner anchor. I transform people's lives with the twin flame, enlightenment that brings them their twin flame abundance. And I do that because the connection is healed between my twin flame and me, which means it is healed between God and our union. And that is going to be a shining example in the world, without exaggeration, and actually pretty normal very normal as a person, very daily life, living my daily life in a regular rhythm, enjoying nature when I can. Yeah. Good food, beautiful clothes, not in an exaggerated thing, but just because it feels good, and sharing of the love in the atmosphere of friendship. That's where this is heading. Yeah. So I hope this was interesting and helpful for this episode. Love from Petra. To listen to the next episode, you need to go to the actual platform of this podcast. You can choose, there are 3 of them. Either you go to Amazon Music, or to Spotify, or to Apple Podcasts. The links to that are below this video. See you there.